On time 24. I need more helium. Hang on.
Welcome
to the EV Cafe
here
at the AA,
at the Carter Academy,
Fleet Mobility Live,
the Business Design Centre in Islington,
live at the ITT Hub 2023. So let's go.
No, fuck that.
Who are the EV Cafe?
We're a team of experts.
Bunch of
Legends.
EV
crazy
Cafe
people.
These guys are on tour in 24. And I'll be there too.
Yes,
Love it.
that was brilliant, John. Thank you. The helium, you're so brave. I didn't want to do it.
I'm just stupid, not brave.
We should have done the intro on helium.
Yeah, you can pretend.
Yeah. Good day, everyone. And thank you for joining us. Welcome to our much anticipated webinar, The Case for EVs, People, Planet, Profits. We're thrilled to have you with us today. Before we dive into today's agenda, I'd like to extend a huge thank you to our gold partners. They are Geotab, the AA, Churchill, EV Civils, and Plug Me In. And we have some exciting updates on our partners. John, would you like to do the honours in this announcement?
It's incredibly kind, but it's Paul that's done all the hard work. Yeah, it's a bit rum me stealing his thunder. But Paul, we've got some sponsors, eh? Some new ones.
We have indeed. Sorry, I wasn't expecting you to. But it's not a hospital pass. It's a wonderful pass, and I'm running for the line after a wonderful weekend of rugby, of course. And yes, what a set of announcements. So Zaptec have joined as a gold sponsor, which is fantastic news. We've also got Dynamon and Interval have also signed up as silver and bronze, or Interval of Renew. But of course, we have Sarah Sloman's very own pay-through, Play the VT.
Yes.
I'm with Keith Brown and Sarah Sloman from Paythrough, and I've got some really exciting news. Paythrough are gold sponsors of the EV Cafe. Keith, who are Paythrough?
Paythrough, we're a payments company that's been around now for about 10 or more years, and for the last few years we've been honing and refining our products for the EV market.
What precisely do you do? Do you take those payments?
Yeah, we are completely agnostic, and we want to work with CPOs or anybody who manages charge points, and then we will take that payment, make sure the money goes to the right place, and also offer what I like, a very smooth user experience. Those drivers can start and stop that charge with ease.
And why the EV Cafe, Keith?
Well, obviously we know the EV Cafe through Sarah, who's been with us for a couple of years now. The EV Cafe is about dialogue, but I think particularly about collaboration. And our view very strongly is if we're going to solve the problems of net zero and the user experience and improve things in this industry, then we have to collaborate.
To go forwards together. Thank you so much, both of you. Bless you. Gold sponsors, yes! Boom.
And the great news
all
is...
agree.
Oh, sorry, Johnny. I was just going to say the great news is we'll have videos like that for all of our new sponsors. Keep an eye out for those coming.
And I think we can all agree that our partners are so important to us. Their support has and will continue to be invaluable. And I believe for that reason, they deserve a round of applause. As always, both take a sip of coffee. Now, as we're all eager to delve into the critical conversation surrounding the case for electric vehicles, let's just remind ourselves why this transition is more crucial now than ever. Amidst all of the buzz around new technology and hardware, it's vital to reconnect with the why of EVs and understand a bit of the how. Today, we're joined by a panel of distinguished guests and speakers who will guide us through this enlightening discussion. First up, we have Sarah Sloman. You might have heard of her. She will be discussing the compelling human aspects of EVs, including the transformative potential of environmental, social, and governance, ESG for short. Professor Richard Allen, a respected climate scientist from the University of Reading, will then take us through the urgency of climate action, underscoring our capability to make a substantial positive difference. And finally, from a practical perspective, Torben Fogg, co-founder of Spiri, will elucidate on how depot chargers can be more of a facility, but also a profitable enterprise. You all know us as the EV Cafe team by now, but in case you're new, we have, starting from the top, Sam Clark from GridServe, Sarah Sloman from PayThrough, Paul Kirby from EV Essentials, and John Curtis, our Ops Director. We've got to come up with a better name for that. And I'm Johnny Berry in my day job with Navuna Vehicle Solutions. Now, before we get started, I'd like to shift the mood and attention for the moment to address some recent and quite frankly, some sad news that has deeply affected our industry. Paul, I'm going to go to you, and I hate to dampen our spirits, but could you share your thoughts on this matter regarding Volta Trucks yesterday?
Do you know what? It's there was a couple of tiny rumours just before this happened, and for Volta Trucks to go to the wall, or let's say to file for bankruptcy, and of course there's always hope that the phoenix could come from the ashes. It was incredibly sad, and sad particularly because I've been able to watch these guys very much from their early prototypes, where they were at the ITT hub the very first year, and we saw the vehicle there as a prototype, and then I watched the pre-production vehicles get built, and then go on for homologation, testing. They've been customer trials. These vehicles have been in use across Europe, and it is a really sad day to think that these vehicles will not now get to the line or get over the line into customer hands. They're not going to leave the production line in Steyr Automotive in Austria, but it's all down to the fact that their battery supplier, a company called Proterra, went to the wall, and I'm guessing at that point, cash flow becomes a massive issue because they're going to have to rethink the whole battery situation. It could be a 3 or 6 month process, and they just don't have the cash to get over that piece of stuff happening out with their control. So incredible tech, incredible design, incredible support, and brilliant people within that business. Real shame to be seeing it come to a halt in the way that it has.
Paul, there's a comment in the chat here from Richard Markey saying that his wife was a social media manager at Volta Trucks. And of course, she's now looking for a job. So Richard Markey's email address is in there. And I think it's really important that we as an industry do support each other. We've got obviously Stuart Middleton, Interval, who's our recruitment expert in clean tech. And it is important that we try to find and support each other in finding new jobs for these people, but also that hopefully Volta, something good can come from what's happened. Am I right in thinking that this was a supply chain issue and it was very much around the battery company going into liquidation?
Yeah, it was. The main issue was the fact that Proterra went to the wall a couple of weeks ago. And weren't able to provide batteries. So to know the Volta truck, it's built around the batteries. So you don't bolt the batteries onto the chassis in a Volta truck. They're within it and protected by the chassis rails, if you like, the ladder rail chassis thing. So it would need a complete remake to bring new batteries in and do all that sort of stuff. And then of course you're at the back of the list against all the other manufacturers that are using other providers. So it does appear to be, and there might be other reasons, but everything has been going really, really well. I've been talking to people from Volta who were saying we were just in customers on Monday giving great feedback around customer trials, looking forward to taking the vehicles. And then a couple of days later, here we are.
Thanks to Mark Elliott, who says that there are some potential opportunities at Zest as well. It's in the chat box if you want to go and follow that. Sam, you kind of shook your head a little when I was talking about batteries and supply chain.
Well, I mean, I think the commercial viability of any business, it needs to be able to have the fluidity and strength to be able to manage those sort of scenarios, because it's happened to me in terms of working capital being stripped from me at the last minute and having to try and deal with it. It's incredibly challenging. It's a very, very hard thing to manage. But I was going to say something Paul mentioned about the big manufacturers, and I think that's a really important point here, because this is not new. If you think about some of you on the call might remember Vectrix, the original motorbike that was built 20 years ago, beautifully engineered, didn't survive because it just couldn't compete in the marketplace. Arrival, we've seen, is all but dead. Even Tesla very, very, very nearly went to the wall a few years ago. You know, now they've come out and they've survived and they've done a fantastic job. But you know, and now we're seeing Volta. So there are. It's I think it's an incredibly challenging and difficult thing to even attempt to try and compete with the big manufacturers. Even if they're not making the same thing yet, they can flick a switch and squash you. So I think it's an incredibly challenging space to be in, to try and build a vehicle when you're surrounded by traditional automotive OEMs that have the might that they are. And I think this is another example where, I don't know, that it was talking a good game, but I always had that worry, always had that fear that they just don't have the same collateral, the same strength, the same cash flow, reserves, balance sheets, all the rest of it that the big boys do, who are probably looking over their shoulders, waiting for them to be successful and then roll out the same thing, you know, or very similar things. So it's tough. It's a tough market.
So I guess the logic for me is that if you lose a battery supplier, surely you can go to another battery supplier. Why is that been such a challenge? Is it, as Sam alludes to, that the working capital that you have is so short that by the time you found another supplier, integrated that kit into your build, that actually you've run up against the buffers?
I suspect so. I mean, obviously, without being in the boardroom where they made that decision, for what reasons they made that decision, I don't suppose we'll ever know the full detail of it. But it certainly feels, because of the integral nature of the batteries to the design of the vehicle, you were going to have to unpick so much. And I mean, we're talking probably 3, maybe 6 months of money that would have to go out the door. And cash flow is such a critical issue. And I guess unless another investor comes along, because let's be really clear here, this was a solution that was being lapped up by the market. It has a massive safety solution designed into the cab area. The access in and out was much easier than we see in traditional truck technology. It was meeting a need around specific operations in the cities, and was very, very well received. The direct vision standards were particularly high, and everything has gone really, really well for it. But this bump in the road, which, as Sam alludes to, you know, the big manufacturers have enough cash reserve to meet and go over those bumps. These guys didn't, it seems.
Can I just say something? I know I'm doing an awful lot of chat this morning, but I'm seeing some old friends back in the chat box that I've not seen for a little while. And it's lovely to see you. Charles Key, Judith Patton, Anne Snelson. People are all saying, I've come back. Love to know why and what's prompted you to do that, because everyone that doesn't make it has been missed. And Pam Hanlon, we know you were late. We haven't seen a note. Get to the back of the class.
Johnny, back to you.
That's the end of that.
I'm just reading all the comments. It's quite nice to read them.
Yeah.
You just messaged hosts and panelists. Hello, everyone. I've cut and paste like 8 times. Message everyone. Hello, everyone. Please message everyone. Change the Dropbox to everyone.
One thing we should say, Johnny, I guess, is that we've got a Q&A box. So we have the chat box on the right-hand side, and that's for general chat and mucking about. The serious business goes on in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So if you want to ask a question of the panelists or indeed the guests, whack something in there, and then we'll pick that up later on during the session and ask your questions. And you may even get a name check. Now there's a thing.
Thank you, John. So I think it's time to introduce our first speaker for today. So might not be known by many of you. Sam Clark, you'd like to do an introduction?
How do I start? I mean,
where do you start?
Where do I start? How do I start?
Oh, this will be good.
I haven't prepared one, so I don't know. You are a tour de force in every way, and a driving force in the industry, and have been for many, many years. And I think it's far better for me just to pass over to you than try and waffle my way through any further. To be honest,
weak, very weak,
weak, poor, unprepared. Must try harder.
I've heard everybody else's. I've got everyone else's stuck up here.
I just would have spotted Sam ripping sellotape because he's frantically sellotaping things around his screen. So maybe I'm honoured that you didn't have to read mine out. That would have been way worse.
Shocking.
It would have.
Shocking. Absolutely shocking. Well, okay, thank you very much. And I did have some pretty slides, but we decided we didn't need pretty slides. So I just thought it'd be lovely to have a chat, and please do EV Cafe crew butt in, and also down on the chat. I always love to see what you're saying about these things. So as Johnny said earlier, I have been invited to talk about ESG and what that means, and also what it means for your people, because we're looking at planet, people, and I think profitability. So this is about how you can structure the growth of what I call a sustainable, ethical, and profitable business, but only if you get it right. So this is about scaling up whilst not torturing the earth. The first thing I'd like to say is that, and thanks for my wonderful introduction, Sam, if you'd have Googled me, you'd have found out that this isn't just something I've learned recently. It's actually 20 years now of working in sustainable transport infrastructure. So for me, it's always been embedded in everything we do, every decision we make, every supplier we use. And it's only recently that I realized that wasn't the case in every business, which I found surprising. And it started out as sort of CSR, corporate social responsibility, and has turned into ESG. So there is a difference. ESG is different because it's environment, society, and governance. And I've recently supported PayThrough going through a carbon footprint benchmarking exercise with Eden 7. And that's because we had an environmental strategy, we had an ESG strategy, but it's not something that you can just nail down and do and pay to do and then put on a shelf. It's supposed to be a dynamic, continuous process. So you have to be not just consistent, but always evolving this, making sure you're positioning yourself as a collaborative sort of client base. And then that makes your brand a go-to, a competitive advantage, I would say, for clients who are looking for that sort of secure green supply chain. So as I said before, ESG is environment, society, and governance, but I think it differs from CSR because you have to have a plan, and that plan has to be measured, and it's better when it's done independently so that you can't worm out of it or pretend that your figures were different from before. But I'd like to see a fourth letter being added in there. It's not happening anytime soon, but I think it should. And I think the word should be either prosperity or profitability, because I really firmly believe that, unfortunately, unless a business process is profitable, it's really unlikely to be taken forward or embraced at all levels of stakeholder engagement. It would just be another tick box, another, yes, it's important, and yes, it is urgent. But I do think with a sort of 1 foot in the too hard camp, if it's an expensive, arduous process. So that's why I think having a third party to do it for you and with you actually is really, really valuable. So I guess on a personal note, when we did our Partners Day, John, you said you didn't realize this about me, but I've been proactively engaged in science and the effect of humans on our climate since before I can remember. And I made people laugh on our EV Cafe podcast. I was getting messages because I recalled how I cried at the age of 7 to my mum because I was so sure that I could smell acid rain in Wiltshire, which is of course absolutely ridiculous. But that sparked something in me, and I went on to study geography with environmental science. I've done 2 Open University courses, both focused on the natural environment, and now just proactively follow with interest any reports and findings from the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and of course the Greenhouse Gas Emissions Guidance, the GHG. So what I really liked about that is, in practical terms, it very clearly states that every business should have an ESG reporting and monitoring structure. And this is so that we can collectively meet our targets on climate change. And of course, the next thought's always going to be, how on earth do I find out if we already have one in our business? And if not, where to begin? How do you get the budget for that? How do you get the interest going for that? You know, I think the times have changed now. It's not just seen as something that is, you know, for one department to do. It goes across the whole business, and that's why I think the profitability and scalability needs to be identified more strategically, so that internally you can sell the merit of having a solid ESG process. So that's about engaging with stakeholders. It's about choosing an independent expert, and then you're going to need to calculate that carbon emissions data. So that's usually done through questionnaires, spend ledgers, reports. You can't hide, basically. If your business has got details on what you've spent your money on, it will reveal how much travel you've done. It will reveal how many company cars you have. It will reveal how dirty your energy is if you've got an office. And then they'll break all that down for you into scope 1, 2, and 3. These are the sort of contributing emission categories. And then the whole report has to be in line with this GHG, the greenhouse gas protocol thing I talked about. So the main part is it takes ages to get done, 3 to 6 months. And then once you've done it, that goes into a continuous improvement sort of strategic action plan against those 3 core pillars. So you have to be proving that you're not just offsetting, and I've got a real bee in my bonnet about offsetting. I want you to meaningfully offset. Search for a scheme that not just takes carbon out of the atmosphere, but perhaps plays to the strengths of your company. For us at PayThrough, we're really people focused. So I'm searching for an opportunity for us to, now we know what our tonnage is, what our very small because we're only scope 3 as a software company, but it's about how do we do the right thing, tick the box, get the certificate to say we've done this, but also do something meaningful that shows that we really, really care and put our money where our mouth is. So I guess I'm conscious of time, but Johnny, if I've got a minute, is there one more minute? Just wanted to talk about the EV Cafe and what we're doing.
Yep.
Thank you. So those who came to our partner day will have had this really drilled into them, but we want to ensure that the EV Cafe is delivering for you. So the aim of us is to be an ethical, sustainable business partner to you and your clients as well. But we're on our own ESG journey. And I remember ahead of COP26 a couple of years ago, I tried to estimate our own carbon footprint. So obviously we're geographically spread as individuals as well. Yes, we're mostly mostly online, but we do, of course, now attend shows too. So it is pretty tough. We did manage to identify our low-hanging fruit. We've all committed to zero emission driving. We lift share where we can. We use the train when we can. We highlight flights individually. We do point the finger at one another if we feel like flights are going a little over the line. But this is about minimizing, so reducing as much as possible, and then making sure that you're not sort of deliberately making costly mistakes. Like our event attendance is really strategic now. We make sure that we ask our suppliers what's going to happen to the materials. We reuse our materials as much as possible. But under the pillar of people, we also donate profit. So we donate monthly to a charity, and we would encourage everybody to contact us and let us know if there's a particular charity that you'd like us to go through. But soon we're going to be doing what I'm calling a collaborative knowledge transfer. We're thinking about how we can help all of you push forward, and that's part of our commitment to you as our community, and our pledges to the 5 of us and our experience in our own businesses. You've got head of decarbonisation at Navuna here, we've got Sam at Gridserve, we've got me and you and John, and that's Paul and John, helping businesses every day work out how to be better at this. And I just think we can collectively reach this carbon neutrality, but only if it comes from committed action rather than yet another process ticking the box. And actually, I saw, Anne, you're on. I completed a very effective course last week with you called the Carbon Literacy Training. And that really hit home what I think there's 10 key steps on achieving this carbon neutrality that we have to do. So it's just a plea really ahead of Richard's presentation, which is really science focused, but enjoyable and accessible too. I just wanted you to all hear our pledge that we are committed to reducing our own carbon footprint. We will be going on our own ESG journey. And as I said, I'll be taking my learnings from that, from Paythrough. So anybody on the call who can help me, please do.
Thank you, Sarah.
My pleasure. Thanks for
You
inviting
actually
me.
have a few more minutes.
JB,
Yes.
could I talk about the money we raised on Friday last week?
Yeah, with
because-
Ben. Yes, please.
Yeah, because you talked about charity, and they say charity starts at home, and our home's automotive. It's this sector, it's in its widest sense. And so we raised some money for Ben, the benevolent fund for the automotive sector last Friday, and we set out to raise £500. And I'm just going to pop the link in the chat box now. We raised £520, which was absolutely stunning. But what saddened me a little was that we got to 520 and everybody said, oh, well, they set a target of £500, let's stop. Ben provides support for well-being, living good lives, and it provides financial grants, support for well-being, right now mental health, and also for end of life. So when people are really struggling, and they're a marvelous charity that Sarah has done an awful lot of work with to promote well-being in both life and, I suppose, in the final years. It is absolutely critical, and all of us have access to Ben and the funding and support that it can provide. So I can't thank enough the people who did sponsor. So Joel Grisman, Linda Grave, Signmark, bless your heart, Jim Blair, Esther Jones from the AA, excuse me, I'm getting all emotional, Anonymous sent loads of money, which was really kind. Rachel Lewis, Gemma Lovett, love it, love it, love it. Hugh Maguire, more from Anonymous, Carl Elliott, Toby Hiles, Ash Bannister, Tom Middleditch from Europcar, Dean the Hedge Pig from Vital, Colin Hennessy from Diode, Bernd Herman, bless you, Dan Martin, although he said Martin, but it's Martin, John Wybrow, the Power Rangers, Pam Hanlon, Paul Kirby, you dip your hand in your pocket, mate. Longest pocket, shortest arms, that bloke. Michelle
I lent him the money.
James Dewhurst. Sam even dipped in. Goodness gracious, I bet that was company money. Sarah Sloman, Kirsty Robinson, more from Anonymous, or maybe me, Matthew Ling, Wayne Dunn. Bless you all. If you can help raise a little bit, if it's a £5, click on the link, giving.ben.org.uk/PF/John-Curtis. We'll put it on the website. It's still there from last week.
It's on the link now. It's in the chat. I've just put it in.
Bless you, matey. Thank you kindly for doing that. If we can get above 520 quid, wouldn't that be marvellous and just part of what we do? And we
John?
also give... Yes, mate.
There was a name that you read out right at the very beginning there. I just want to give a shout out to Joel Grisman. You may not have heard of him before, but he started working at GridSurf in my team on Monday.
Oh.
So I don't know whether he's listening or not, but
Deepest commiserations.
Yeah.
Support is available to all who have to do that.
Yeah, Ben have got a chat line.
Ben's there for you guys, Joel. Just call Ben.
Joel Grisman, thank you. And presumably you work with Sam Grantham, who also works for...
He does. He does. He also works.
It's an old joke, but basically Sam just forgets the names of everyone he works with.
That's right, Sarah. I do.
Oh, wow.
That's awkward. I've got a question in the Q&A. Should we answer that one?
Why not?
If we can.
Have we got time, JB?
Yeah, we've got a minute or so.
All right.
Go for it.
Nigel Boyle, is there any truth that VW are stopping EV production? Well, interesting you should ask that. They stopped for 2 weeks, from October the 2nd through to October the 16th. They stopped manufacturing the ID3 and the Cupra Born, and 296 staff were affected. So yes, they have, and they have scaled back because demand isn't there and they're getting whammed by the Chinese and Tesla. So kind of. But I think they're just managing supply and demand. That's my view on it. Paul, anything different?
Didn't know that had happened. I was really interested as to know if anybody had an actual answer to that. And JC, you are finger on the pulse. Of course, it's not a van, so I couldn't give a monkeys. But you know,
I do the news, you know, mate. That's what we do.
You raise a good point, though, John. And I just wonder whether, there's certain things like COVID that has an inherent hangover where companies struggle. They survive it, but then they struggle thereafter. And given that the Tesla Model Y is now outselling the Toyota Corolla, which has been top of the list for the most popular vehicle in the world for year after year, how long is it until there's a certain hangover of these big companies like Tesla are taking tremendous market shares? And maybe the big boys are starting to struggle a bit, with this new Chinese demand and Tesla demand coming through is starting to push their buttons probably more firmly than ever.
And as Lorna McAteer rightly points out, VW have had a number of recalls, which has been damaging. The Tesla Model 3 pricing is really, really impressive at the moment. It's
gone down again, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, there are huge factors in here, but VW are feeling it. So it's not just the new boys on the block, the Volta, who maybe are running close to the wire in terms of financing. The big boys are also struggling. So it's a tough world out there.
It could be a result of Dieselgate, of course, right? I mean, VW meant the result of Dieselgate forced them really to accelerate their EV much faster than they had planned to, and the operating system didn't come out too well and has had loads and loads of issues. So maybe it is there's a net result here in terms of ramifications of things happened some years ago now, but nevertheless, probably is having an effect.
Can I just say, Nigel Boyle, who asked the question about VW, had to mute us and go on a call and miss the answer. Effectively, Nigel, yes, they did. They shut down for a couple of weeks, and it looks like they're managing supply and demand for the Cupra Born and the ID3. But yeah, all the big boys are under pressure at the moment. There seems to be more stock than there are buyers.
Well, I think, interesting that BYD is it 32% of sales in a particular month? I forget the numbers exactly, but it was something like that. And you think, my goodness, from an absolute standing start to boom, that is big jump.
6% of the UK market and 6% global market share. That's their aspiration. So they are on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear from manufacturers. Maybe we need to have a session on it because I sat into a presentation with Mercedes last week and they were talking about the VAN EA architecture. and they think they're going to have a use case for every van in battery electric vehicle form by 2026. So yeah, it's very interesting. Maybe that's another one for another day.
Do you think they would, Johnny? Do you think they actually would come on though? I mean, it's a difficult time for them. Do you think the OEMs would be willing to speak publicly? I'm not sure whether they'd be that keen.
I think they might. I think they might want to talk about their strategy
I think so.
forward in this space, particularly when they're talking about battery electric vehicle and their wider climate goals. Because they have to adhere to the Paris Agreement and whatnot. But that's for another day, I think, Sam. So
yeah, let's test it out. Let's see whether they're willing to come to the party. Let's do it.
Yeah. I did have a question for you, Sarah, but maybe we'll save it for later. And it's around greenwashing. How do we?
Oh yeah, sounds juicy. Should have asked it ages ago. I'm well into it.
Or possibly hydrogen trucks.
Oh yeah, that's a spot for that.
One for later, because we must move on. And
okay,
she's our first guest speaker, our first external guest speaker for today's session. Sam, would you like to do the honours and look at one of your notes? Introduce our next speaker, please.
Yes, I do have notes. I have just about prepared. Although I'm sorry, Sarah, that my introduction was so poor, but it's I was distracted this morning by you, in fact, so that's your fault. But anyway, Richard Allen. Richard Allen is a professor of climate science at the University of Reading. He's also part of the National Centre for Earth Observation and lead author on the recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, with a particular focus on changes in the global water cycle. Now, what isn't written down here, but I'm just going to ad lib, is that I think this will be the fourth time now that I've listened to Richard speak about climate change and the impact that it's having on us all. And there's two people that spring to mind that have really impacted me in the last few years. One is Todd, my CEO, because he's very, very passionate about this space. And the other one is Richard, because the stuff that he tells us is terrifying, but it's also really important for us all to understand. So I think it's an honor, frankly, to have him on our small stage and really tell us what is actually going on in the world and how much we are all a resultant factor of what's going on with climate change. So yeah, I've digressed slightly, but my lesser known fact for Richard, which is completely random, but I love the fact these notes are so random sometimes, is that he is quite comfortable walking on his hands, which is amazing.
Prove it.
But yeah,
I think
his
Richard,
legs going across.
you may have stitched yourself up here because now we're getting to know you a little bit better and you're in our circle a bit more. There is going to come a time where you're going to have to prove this, and we're going to have to film you doing it. I think that's pretty much guaranteed now. So, but anyway, I will shut up.
I'm just stitched you up
properly, Richard.
Alan says.
Thank
You've
you
got
very
to
much.
that's
fun. I probably won't try it now because that could be disastrous. But
you've got to read it.
Well, thank you for that very kind introduction, Sam. So yes, I'm providing kind of a science nugget, I guess, which is the kind of motivation for why we're all here, why we're doing what we're doing. I mean, I only know all you guys through Liz Allen, so I'm a bit of a fish out of water, but hopefully this will fit in okay. So I'm going to go back to my safety slides. So so essentially, I'm going to give a little. Is that working? Good. Right. So I'm going to just give you an outline of, the causes, consequences, and solutions for climate change. So we've all seen the extreme weather that's going on over the last year and the last few years. And it's pretty obvious that warming of climate is intensifying extremes. The physics, multiple lines of evidence show this, and which we've looked at in the IPCC. But of course, climate has always changed, and it's changed over many millions of years, but also over glacial cycles, so going back hundreds of thousands of years. We know all about this. So we know from various evidence. So you drill into Antarctica, you're going to go 2 kilometers down. It's like it's a 1 million year time machine. The deeper down you go, the further back in time you go. And it shows, based on various geochemical evidence, how the climate has swung between frozen glacial states, present interglacial states. Vast amounts of ice has formed at the poles and melted again, and trapped in these little bubbles of fossilized, the atmosphere from many thousands of years ago. And what you can see in this diagram, because of these changes in Earth's orbit around the sun, which you know all about, there's been these swings in climate. Carbon dioxide has varied between 180 and 280 parts per million in the atmosphere. It's actually responded to that natural climate change and amplified it. But something else is going on now, because if we put on the latest record going up to present, you can see that the present concentrations in 420 parts per million are completely outside any natural changes. And we think carbon dioxide levels are probably at their highest level for maybe 20 million years, definitely 2 million years. And it's basically because we're burning most of the forests that have ever existed on the planet, that have been fossilized into coal, into oil, gas, and we're putting that carbon straight back into the atmosphere. Now, the problem for us is because that affects the greenhouse effect. Greenhouse effect keeps the planet warm enough for us to live, but we're making that greenhouse effect stronger. So carbon dioxide, it traps heat, it reduces the efficiency at which Earth can cool out to space. So essentially, you've got a budget. We all like budgets, don't we? So there's sunlight coming in, infrared radiation going out to space. If we're cutting down the amount that the planet can cool to space, we've got more energy coming in than leaving. So the planet has to heat up. And that's what's going on. Essentially, this enhanced greenhouse effect is heating the planet. That's causing the system to warm. Now, when we look at the observed changes, so in the black line in this plot, you can see going from 1850 to 2020. This is a plot out of the IPCC assessment. You can see that the climate has warmed over the last 100 or so years, particularly over the last 50 years, by around 1.3 degrees C. And we've just seen some recent temperatures have really spiked this year. We're going up even higher than that just this year, which is pretty concerning. Now, we can understand these changes by looking at all the physics, but we put all of our physics into complex computer simulations. So millions of lines of computer codes analyze, basically representing what happens to the land, the atmosphere, the oceans, clouds, etc. Now, when we do this, if we run these simulations just with natural factors like volcanoes going off, the sun periodically getting brighter and dimmer, and it's a natural 11-year cycle. The green curve along the bottom, you can just see there's no real change in the climate. It's it varies, but it's not changing. When we put in human factors, then we can reproduce this increase in the temperature. And there's two things. There's the greenhouse gases increasing, which are warming the planet. But in addition to that, we've actually been putting particle pollution out in the air, which we don't like to breathe. It's not good for us. We've been cleaning up our act with that effect. So that particle pollution has actually been reflecting sunlight back to space. So it's actually been masking some of this warming effect. Now, it's interesting that Sarah mentioned earlier on acid rain. I remember acid rain in the 1980s. That was part of this particle pollution. We've actually cleaned up our act quite substantially in this part of the world, less so in other parts like West Africa and India. But this reduction in particle pollution is now allowing that masking effect to be reduced again. So that's even adding more to that heating. So maybe some of this is contributing to this recent acceleration. So that's something we're actively looking at. The other factor is that things amplify climate. So we've already seen in going back many thousands of years that carbon dioxide actually naturally amplifies climate change, but water vapor amplifies climate change. When you warm the planet up, there's more water in the air. That's a greenhouse gas that adds to the warming. And in addition to this, more water in the air makes extremes worse. So essentially, a warmer atmosphere is a more thirsty atmosphere. It's more capable of sapping moisture from one region, for the winds to move that moisture into storm systems, into monsoons, and make the intensity of rainfall more strong. So we're going to see some serious flooding in Scotland. We already have this year, but in the next few days with Storm Babbitt, we're going to see that ongoing. It's being made worse because that's extreme weather, but because the atmosphere is warmer than it would have been without greenhouse gases, the intensity of rainfall will be even stronger. So it's making extremes worse. Now, coming on to solutions, which is where you guys all fit in. The only way we can limit these extremes getting worse is by limiting the warming. And using these same complex computer simulations to, we can see what's going to happen out into the future. So you run these same simulations that you use to understand past climate change to look at different scenarios where we carry on emitting vast quantities of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, and ones where we're rapidly and massively cutting greenhouse gases. So this shows temperature against time, so going out to 2100. And you can see the only way we can limit warming to 1.5 degrees C, which is what we're all aiming for, because above that we get to more dangerous climate change. We can actually, by continuing the path we're taking, maybe we're going to get to 3 degrees of warming by the end of the century, which doesn't sound much when you compare to 20,000 years ago, when glaciers, ice sheets were moving across northern Scotland in the last glacial period. That the world was only like 5 degrees cooler. So 3 degrees of warming is pretty catastrophic. So the only way we can limit extremes, and say limit as well the complete melting of Arctic ice, for example, is by limiting the warming. There are other parts of the climate system that are slower, and they're going to carry on. So sea level rise is a long-term problem. We can see that sea level rise will carry on increasing by half a meter up to maybe 1 meter or more by the end of the century, which is pretty devastating given the vast number of people that live below 1 meter sea level. But if we go out into the future, we can see that even when we cut greenhouse gases, we're still looking at maybe 1, 2, even 3 meters of sea level rise by 2300. Now that's way in the future, so we can adapt to some extent to these things, but it takes so long for the deep oceans to warm and expand, and for the giant ice sheets like Greenland to melt away to their new equilibrium, smaller amounts. This is a long-term problem, but the shorter term aspects, we can immediately limit extreme weather getting worse, melting of ice, if we limit the warming to 1.5 degrees C by limiting the emissions. So that finally comes on to what we do. And a diagram from the IPCC kind of really underlines the nature of the problem, because it shows temperature up this axis and cumulative carbon dioxide emissions in the nice unit of gigatons of carbon dioxide. And you can see that if you plot the observed temperatures against how much we've already emitted, there's quite a straight line. You increase the cumulative emissions, you increase the temperature. So it's pretty straightforward. And this is where we are right now. Now, these projections going out into the future show that they all follow that line, but we can stop at one of these different junctures here. So the only way we're going to limit warming to 1.5 degrees C is if we have this very low emissions scenario. So we've got a budget again, 3,000 gigatons of carbon dioxide. So we're there now, we're already nearly at 2,500 gigatons of carbon dioxide. So we have a budget which we need to limit. So that's where net zero comes in. We've got to get to net zero, because otherwise we're continuing to emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. We're continuing pushing this that way. But the other aspect is, unfortunately, if we don't do things rapidly, we're going to be dithering about. And even if we get to net zero in 2050, we're going to carry on emitting vast quantities. So the area under this curve is how much we emit, the cumulative emissions. So we need to rapidly cut. This is what the IPCC is showing, the physics shows. We need to rapidly cut in the near term and get to net zero by 2050. The area under this curve is much lower, and that's the only way we're going to get to this cutoff here and limit warming to below dangerous thresholds. So finally, the way to do this then is to act now, to act immediately, to keep future options open. Act everywhere. So this is across all sectors, so including the sectors that you're all involved in, but across all sectors it's got to be. Act thoughtfully. We've already, I think you lot are pioneering in this. You're thinking about strategies that are thoughtful, that are linking in with other areas and are good in multiple ways. And you've got to act jointly. You've got to act collaboratively. So it's about local groups, local councils, whole sectors like your sector, also large companies, universities. The University of Reading, for example, where I am, is doing a lot, and up to national level. But it's only by collaborating across all sectors and all levels that we're going to get this job done. But we can do it. The physics says we can do it, but it needs this collaborative, joint and thoughtful action immediately. So I'll stop there and stop sharing my screen.
Legend.
Well done,
Very good.
Richard.
Thank you very
Collaborative
much.
and joint action couldn't spoken a truer word. Thank you so much for framing essentially our mission with the facts and science that we need. And if you scroll through the chat when you get a second, Richard, not only is your wife dropping you in it to say that you can do backflips and play the bass guitar, but also people are really listening to your advice. There's Liz. It's all about collaboration and just using a bit of joined up thinking across all sectors. Quite right. And also bite-sized steps. And one thing I learned from Anne's carbon literacy course is doing something, just doing something. Honestly, making people start somewhere has a huge cumulative effect. And just helping people to, why they call it carbon literate, is to understand the impact. A lot of people don't want to do bad things. They just don't realize what they are doing. And even people on the course didn't all have, for example, green energy suppliers. You know, it's a huge improvement that you can make just with a click of a mouse.
Steph Walker, thank you so much. Brilliantly clear, Richard.
Richard, yeah.
That was great.
What more do you need?
I now don't believe in climate change. Because after hearing you talk, it makes me realise that it's not a matter of opinion or belief. It is a certainty of fact. And the data says it all. So thanks a lot for that. Right, before we open up the mailroom and interact with our audience, we must hear from our final guest speaker for today. So over to you, Sam, and your lovely notes. Just as you take a sip of coffee.
Yeah, great timing. Thank you, Johnny. Timing is everything, isn't it? It really is. All right, then. Lastly, Torben Fogg is the CIO/COO and co-founder of Spirii. He's more than 13 years executive experience on driving e-mobility solutions to the European markets. Worked 7 years in E.ON, e-mobility, and Nordic and European level. Torben is experienced in implementing innovative and robust mechanisms, keeping an accelerated transition pace towards sustainable transportation in Europe. There's a lot of big words in there. He is a HW and e-mobility solution architect expert. And HW, of course, stands for, Torben?
It was supposed to stand for hardware. I've
Exactly.
been
So I
heavily
knew that,
involved
yep.
in that in the past.
Yeah. Hardware, absolutely. I knew that, of course. Right, fun fact about Torben. He truly believes in roaming, and public chargers should all be enabled for roaming through apps, not just by credit card or terminals. Why does he say that? Well, his longest EV drive was from Copenhagen to Porto and returned 2,800 kilometers each way, which is about as far as I've ever known anyone travel on an electric vehicle. So that's fascinating in its own right. Why did he do this crazy ride? He thought it was necessary to explore front-running charging capabilities and long-haul journeys. During the autumn vacation from next week, he will drive from Copenhagen to Piemonte and thereafter to Paris. This is only possible by utilizing roaming, he believes. So, Torben, thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to our merry crew for the day.
Thanks a lot, guys, and thanks for allowing me to join you. Yeah, it sounds like I'm not spending time on anything else than driving around. It's not completely true. The Porto thing came out in the COVID situation, the time period there where it was actually completely crazy to drive that distance. It would have been much easier to fly, time-wise at least. But we were a little bit afraid that we couldn't get into Portugal, and then we will have to fly back. So we took the car, took the chance, and then we just decided if we're not allowed to drive into Portugal, we'll just drive somewhere else and have vacation. So that was the main idea there. But I did actually test a few places around how it worked well with roaming and where it definitely did not work well. So there's still a lot of things to do when it comes to roaming. But let's leave that for another discussion. I'm sure we don't have too much time to just discuss all the different other aspects that are not on the agenda. But otherwise, feel free to reach out if you want to hear more details about that. I don't know how many of you know about Spirii, but very, very briefly about Spirii. Spirii is a platform for e-mobility solutions. We are in operation in 17 markets, mainly in Europe, but also beyond Europe. Our main customers are CPOs, and here CPOs can be at least two different things. It can be charge point operators or charge point owners. And I hope I'm not insulting anybody, but usually when we see charge point owners, they're less skilled when it comes to operational competences, or maybe they don't have the organization, and therefore they ask maybe us to do their operation for them or somebody else on our platform. While charge point operators, they have a lot of skills within the operational side as well. Common for both of these two CPOs is that they own the infrastructure and they need to have return on investment on the infrastructure as fast as possible. when it comes to what Richard mentioned just before, we are definitely supporting a fast reduction on CO2, and this is one of the things that we at least we truly believe ourselves that with the thing that we have invented, the platform that we are delivering, we can help people transfer or transit from petrol and diesel to EVs a little bit faster, because we think we are making it easy with that journey for them. And then, of course, you are most welcome to disagree if you want. We are all open to any suggestions that you might have, or any ideas as well. But we do have a lot of different tools in our toolbox that makes it easier and more profitable to switch from conventional to EV driving. Just to mention a few of them, and I don't want to drag you through all the details. When it comes to smart charging is a term that is not a standard, but it's being used widely, and therefore sometimes it's worth diving a little bit into it to find out what are the differences when speaking about smart charging. But we do have features that allows you to charge when it's cheapest or when it's greenest, and greenest here means when the CO2 content in the electricity production is lowest. It means something for those that have a green pounding heart, I would say. But we also have offers like dynamic pricing. Dynamic pricing was very popular, especially in the early stages of the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, where we saw the electricity and gas prices vary a lot, and they became quite high in periods. So to lower the financial risk of operating a network of chargers, it would be much more wise to have your markup on top of your electricity cost price and whatever lies there, and follow that over the 24 hours of the day, so that you don't sell your kilowatt hours at a specific price. If it's kilowatt hours, that is the basis of a business model. So you don't sell to a fixed price when the electricity price is here, and vice versa. You don't have a high price when the electricity price is low. Then you become unattractive, I would say, for your customers. So that's another tool, and I will revert to some more interesting tools in a few seconds. But I promise to say a few words about fleets. And when it comes to fleets, we have a lot of different fleet operators on our platform today. Some of them are working only with public charging, and that is, for instance, taxi companies. It's also, well, not only, but car sharing companies. They are also working a lot with public charging, but definitely also with their own private charging hubs as well, and sometimes in combination. Then we have trucks and buses, and a lot of them are actually today working on private ground only for themselves, but more and more of them are also opening up because they want to enlarge their revenue, and they also know that even their competitors are competitors. They are part of the full equation to lower the temperature on the planet and produce less CO2. So therefore, they are also willing to open up for public charging when they're not using the chargers themselves. Today, we see a lot of push within, especially the heavy transportation, but also light transportation is growing heavily. I mean, it's exponentially, but the heavy transportation, buses, trucks, there's a big political push for it in many countries. And one of the difficulties there is that it's difficult to get the buses and trucks fast enough. And whenever you get that, then it can be difficult to get the charging infrastructure sufficiently fast, so you actually can charge your trucks and buses when they arrive. That's a need. And having said that, then electricity is also a little bit constrained here and there. So there's some places in the Netherlands, for instance, where you can have to wait up to 10 years before you can get the power connection that you actually want. So what do you do there in order to keep your business and be part of the transition, but also to keep your business growing by having to be forced to drive into environmental zones in cities? Well, if you can't get the power fast enough, then you can make a combination of power sources so that your power comes from maybe PVs, batteries, grid connection, maybe even a building that has a weak or strong grid connection already, and then you can combine the things there and ensure that you also, via other advanced methods, can control your charges the way that you want. Looking a little bit into the investments in that sort of setup, since it's PVs and batteries together with all the rest of the gear, then the investments are definitely higher than just connecting chargers to the grid, at least usually. So higher investments, but then shorter time to market, I would say, because then you can get grid power fast enough, or local grid power. And then you can say, if you look a little bit into the benefits from doing these maybe larger investments, then you can benefit from, at least in the countries where you have grid tariffs and grid penalties, where it's based a little bit on the power side. If you consume this amount of power maybe in 10, 20 minutes, then you are bound to pay for that for the rest of the year. Not so good if you're delivering a lot of power, but by inserting batteries in between your grid connection and your delivery side, then you can lower the power penalty, if we can call it that, to the grid companies by simply filling up your batteries a little bit slower and releasing the power fast. So you can easily have, you can say, the power that you need in your local grid without having to pay a lot on the OPEX side to the grid companies. It depends a little bit. It's a bit of a balance on how you need to define these things. And if you want, we can dive into that a little bit later. But this is just one of the parts where you could say, with bigger investments, well, you can lower the OPEX in those countries where it makes sense to do that. But there are also other benefits. And some of the other benefits are related to what I usually would call demand response techniques. Here, when I preach, I usually preach about two different sort of techniques. One is the TSO demand response, and that's usually on national basis, where you need to obey rules in different energy markets within a country. Now, I'm from Denmark, and in Denmark, it's probably the smallest country in Europe, but we do have 2 energy markets, and next summer we will have a 3rd one as well, believe it or not. So you can have different number of energy markets in just one country. So within these energy markets, you can trade within different segments. Some of the segments are related to frequency regulation. It's a very deep technical area, and I don't want to burden all of you with that right now. But you can say, by supporting the grid stability, the TSO side, and the grid stability with making sure, or at least trying to optimize the grid frequency as much as you can to the center frequency, which is dictated by your TSO, then they can actually release money for you. So it's within what some people would probably refer to as virtual power plants. So you have your power plant. Your power plant is your network, and here you can change the energy consumption based on certain techniques, and the TSO demand response is, among other things, within the frequency regulation part. Some of you might know some of the buzzwords: FCR, FFR, and so on. And you can use that on AC chargers, you can use it on DC chargers, and you can definitely also use it on batteries. And then you can combine all the things. And then there's another thing as well. Yeah, sorry.
Torben, no, not at all. We are going to run out of time. But what you've demonstrated very, very clearly is that the Spirii software is able to get the very best out of the investment you make in your charging infrastructure and your renewables infrastructure. If people want to contact you, Torben, could you do me a favor and put your, in fact, we have your email address. So what I'll do, if I may, is put that into the chat box here. And then if anybody wants to reach out and find out more, they can do that directly with you. Is that okay?
That will definitely be perfect. Just to give you, before you switch me off, just to give you a financial sort of insight for the huge investment in battery banks, then we usually in some energy regions see a return on investment on 2 to 3 years. So figuring out that you might have a contract on the area for 10 or 15 years, then you have an upside of that more investment for a large period and long period.
We like a quick payback.
Very good.
Great stuff. Thank you, Torben, very much indeed.
Thanks for that, John. I wasn't aware at the time. I was so busy listening. But we are a bit behind on time, so maybe perhaps we can use the last minute or so just to go for a brief Q&A.
And there's only one question, interestingly, and that one question was around the moving of the 2030 ban on petrol and diesel vehicles, and whether that is going to have an impact, a negative impact on anything that we do. And it's interesting because we've talked about this endlessly since the announcement was made by Rishi Sunak. As far as I'm concerned, it makes no difference whatsoever. Anybody else?
I replied directly on that basis, John, because that's all we've said. And also I echoed it from the Fleet Mobility Live, EV World Congress. And I see Paul's got his finger up. I do have a question for Torben. And does Richard want to come back on for a quick Q&A? Or have we absolutely nailed it and there's no time? There he is. Go on,
well,
Paul.
I just want to say about the 2035 thing that the direct impact of it is uncertainty, and it's not necessarily in the decision makers. It's not in terms of government or manufacturers. Fleets are going, what are we going to do about this? What difference does it make? It's created a lot of questions, because we know what the ZEV mandate looks like, we know what that content looks like, we know what the ambition is, but fleets don't, and operators are questioning. And maybe thinking, oh, I've got more time on diesel. In vans, they have. That's a fact. They've got 3 years at 30% of their vehicles can be purely diesel, or 5 years, and so it is impacting. There is definitely an impact, but not necessarily in the ambition of the market to make the transitions that are already on the journey.
Maybe I'm being simplistic. Hans Nelson says, I think it changes things. It changes mindset.
Yeah.
And the only thing I've learned from my many, many years of being depressed and miserable is that mindset is something I control. It's not what everybody else controls. That's what I control. If you choose to have a positive mindset that says the investment we need to make, the work that we need to do will deliver the positive improvements that Richard so articulately put forward, then that is the right thing to do. It is not always easy, but it is always right.
Yeah, and John, there's a Joe Tanner's put a note in there with a comment as well, and I'm just going to pick out the one word, which is perception. And it's very, very dangerous word, because there's a lot of government perception at the moment in terms of wanting to appear to be giving a certain steer, and actually, as Paul, you sort of answered your own question in a way. With ZEV mandate is now the thing we've got to hold our hat on and point out to people. That's part of the process. That means that my dad said to me yesterday, he said, "Oh, this 2035 thing, that's a bit of a kick in the teeth, isn't it?" I was like, "Well, yeah, but I've only got a fat lip, right? We'll crack on anyway." It's sort of, we will move on anyway. We will soldier through, and the commercial markets have already told us that as well.
It's interesting that Anne has come back and said the consumer mindset.
This is really important.
Consumers now don't think it's important to make that change. And I suppose that's why what we do, and when we collaborate, what we do collectively, is so important. We have voices. We need to work together like a choir to sing the same song. It does matter, and here are the reasons why. And Richard, Torben, Sarah, you've all put really cogent cases forward today, and we need to keep running in that direction, holding hands and singing loud. It matters.
And at 3 minutes past 1, we better leave it there.
So does my lunch.
If you're not already subscribed, please do so. We'd greatly appreciate it. And it's the best way to stay up to date on our webinars, weekly news, podcasts, and what else might come in the future. That's all from us. On behalf of the EV Cafe team, goodbye.
Thank you,
Thank you to our guests. Wonderful.